Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service offers tax preparation for individuals and businesses across from City Hall in Nisswa and on the web at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where this evening we have, I think, a fascinating program, some new research that's being studied on the adverse effects of raising children when things happen to them that have negative impacts on them. And it can affect all of us, whether it's a sister, a brother, a mom, a dad. We all have impacts on raising young children. And there's some really new, interesting research being done in this area. And my guests are here tonight to talk about that. I'd like to introduce to my right Susan Beallieu. And Susan, are you the director of a program, or what is your title?
My work?
Yeah.
Well, actually, right now I'm a student at the University of Minnesota. I'm in a PhD program down there. So just work and working as a TA and then a full-time student, full-time
Okay,
mom.
and this is an area, though, that you've taken a great deal of interest in.
Yeah,
right?
because of my previous work with Extension and working with the tribal communities and building youth programs. Yep.
And to her right is Lowell Johnson. And Lowell, you've done everything, but what are you doing now? Tell us what your role is.
Well, both Susan and I are certified ACE interface trainers. And ACE is an acronym that stands for the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the ACE interface framework, which we've both been trained in, is a education and community development model to try to bring forward public awareness about the problem of the adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and the solution to it. So both of us are currently working with the Brainerd Lakes Area Early Childhood Coalition on an effort called Cradle to Career, where we're trying to bring forward the idea that the healthy social emotional development of children is the key to family relationships, community relationships, and a successful workforce. So it's a pretty ambitious project in the big picture.
So for the rest of this program, we're going to use that acronym ACE.
Correct.
And there will be a slide sort of showing that overview. That's sort of a triangle.
Yes.
What this ACE particularly is. In general, what is it that you're studying? What is it that you're looking at?
Well, the original ACE study happened in the 1990s, and it came out of concern from the Kaiser Permanente healthcare organization in San Diego about why some adults are so healthy and some adults have so many health problems. And this was also at the time when the information about the prevalence of child sexual abuse was coming forward. And so they started to wonder, could it be children who are mistreated turn into adults who got health problems? So that was sort of the question that they began to explore. And so what they did was they created the ACE pyramid as their hypothesis for studying physical health and its relationship to children being mistreated. So the ACE pyramid is the conceptual design that we're working from.
Now, when you say mistreated, I think in your studies, I've heard you talk before, there's a lot of different definitions of what mistreatment are, aren't there?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of different things that can affect children later in life. They don't all have to be what we would consider to be violent things necessarily. There's a lot of. Could you give us some of the ideas you're talking about here? Yeah,
in the ACE study, there were 10 specific questions that were asked of the 17,000 people in the study's population. Under the category of neglect, participants were asked whether they had experienced emotional or physical neglect. Under the general category of abuse, they were asked if they had experienced physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. And then there was another general category which has been labeled household dysfunction. And so that included mental illness of a parent, substance abuse, alcohol or drug addiction of a parent, incarceration of a parent, witnessing domestic violence, and separation from a parent due to death or divorce. So there's a total of 10 ACEs altogether that were studied.
You know, thinking about this, all the military families that have been split, with this study, would you see an impact on those families when their families are broken up like they are for 9 months or a year sometimes? Would that show in this kind of a study?
That would probably fit under the category of separation of a parent. So yes, there is implications for military families.
Did the study also find that there were some students, or some kids, I should say, who were resilient to those things, even when all those bad things happened?
Yes.
They came out still in good shape?
Yeah, and that's the good news that we want to talk about. The problem is sort of the prevalence of the ACEs experiences in families, but the solution is in resiliency. So children can experience the ACEs in their family, but still bounce back if resiliency has been built into their lives.
So what is it that you're trying to do with your project? I mean, specifically in the Brainerd Lakes area, what are you trying to accomplish?
Well, I guess I would say as ACE interface trainers, we really want to get the awareness of ACEs out into the community so people understand what ACEs are and what the implications on the neurodevelopment of children, what the impacts are. And then I think our long-term goal is hopefully that the community, once the community understands what ACEs does and the impacts, will come together and build some resiliency strategies specific to this area, given the people that live here and the resources and the strengths and assets that are here in the Brainerd Lakes area. So that's kind of the long-term vision, but I think the first steps that Lowell and I think are important is getting the awareness out there about
So
ACEs.
if an organization wants to hear about this, you would go and speak to them?
Yep, Lowell and I have gone out and done trainings a couple different places now, and we're open to doing additional trainings. We're both very passionate about this topic and feel it's really critical for healthy individuals, healthy children, healthy families, healthy community.
Well, you've got a pretty interesting background. Could you give us a little bit more of your background than just what this project is?
Well, I'm a retired educator, and I spent most of my career working with young children and families with a special interest in healthy father involvement in families. And when I retired and moved to the Brainerd Lakes area, I became involved with a couple of efforts. The Brainerd Lakes Area Early Childhood Coalition was one, but then also Crow Wing Inside Out Connections, which is a group that is trying to work on the problem with incarceration. So in the last several years, I've been working on literacy and parent education at the Crow Wing County Jail. And basically, the inmates at the Crow Wing County Jail are adults who were ACEs kids.
Really?
So there's a cause and effect relationship between being maltreated as a child and how your life progresses as an adult. So specifically there, I'm trying to work on interruption of the ACEs cycle while people are incarcerated.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Are you studying mostly early childhood in this project?
Okay, yeah, early childhood is in a sense the most critical time because that's when the largest amount of brain development is happening in children. But the reality is that brain development happens, the brain is not fully developed till the mid-20s. So all through the years of adolescence is also a very important time for brain development. So we're focused on trying to bring awareness about the importance of brain development, but it is, in a sense, it's a lifelong issue. Our brains continue to be developing throughout life, and the good news, again, is that they're adaptable to the toxic stress that some children experience by being ACEs kids.
We've had programs on fetal alcohol syndrome here, and I think we're realizing more and more and more that those 0 to 6 ages, 7 and 8, are so critical in children's development, isn't it? And we're paying a pretty heavy price in some of our society when we have environments where these kids aren't in healthy environments.
Yeah, I mean, to build a strong foundation for children 0 to 6 is critical, and it's much easier to do that than it is to work on the end that Lowell is working, where they're already incarcerated, on the intervention pieces versus the prevention. But yeah, I mean, the brain is really in the first 0 to 6. The brain is making lots and lots of connections with the neurons, and one of the sayings that they use in brain development is what fires together wires together. So when we have an experience, our brains learn through experience. So when we have an experience, then whatever was firing at that time when we had that experience, those are the connections that are made. That process is called arborization, where the connections are being made in the different neurons. And so it's really interesting. We do have a slide too, but we won't show it today, where it shows how at birth there aren't very many connections between the brain cells. And then at age 6, there's a whole bunch of them. There's a lot of connections. And then during puberty, there's a process that the brain goes through called pruning. And so connections that haven't been used very often, that maybe only happened once or twice, those get pruned away. And then the connections that we've had, the experiences we've had over and over and over repeatedly, those connections get stronger. So there's a process that our brains go through of arborization, branching out, and then during adolescence, pruning. But like Lowell said, our brains learn throughout our lifespan, and so we're constantly making new connections. And even though somebody may have a high ACE score of 4 or more, the brain has what's called neuroplasticity, and so the ability to rewire, in essence, itself through having positive experiences. The brain can rewire and be more, I guess, adaptive to healthy relationships. And
when you're talking about ACE scores, could you give us a little better understanding of what that means?
Okay, an ACE score, there are 10 adverse childhood experiences, 10 ACEs. So if a person has had one of those experiences as a child, that's an ACE score of 1. If they have another one, it's an ACE score of 2.
So if they had a separation in the family, that's 1.
Yeah.
If they had experiences with alcohol abuse,
Yep.
that could be 2.
That would be a 2.
And up to 10 different categories.
And the research shows that the tipping point is a score of 4 or more. So if a child has had 4 or more ACEs, then the rest of the pyramids kind of comes into play. So the problems, social and physical problems of the pyramid, get predictable the more ACEs a person has experienced.
So if you see a score of 4 and you have these 4 categories, can you somewhat predict what that might mean the child will do later in life?
Yes, it's statistically correlated. And what's to me is important about the ACE study is that the two big findings were, first of all, how prevalent the ACEs are. In the original ACE study, 67% of the respondents had 1 or more ACE in their life. And the link to physical health, because now it has been shown that maltreatment of children results in physical health problems as adults, and again, that tipping point is 4 or more ACEs. Then the other significant part is that the brain's research has informs us about it's because you disrupt the normal neurological development of the brain that these problems result from.
So essentially what happens when our bodies are only meant to be under stress for about 20 minutes. That's about how long it takes cortisol, which is a stress hormone, to go through our bodies. So that gives us time to fight or flee, right? But what happens is when children are under constant stress, it's called toxic stress, there are what's called seedling cells in different parts of the brain. And so those cells are essentially set to go off later in life when that part of the brain is supposed to develop. When cortisol is constantly flooding their brains and flooding their body, it kills those seedling cells. And so oftentimes there's a delay between when you see an abuse happen and what the impact of the abuse is. It might not occur, you might not see symptoms for 9 to 13 years because the brain, that part of the brain isn't set to develop for 9 or 13 years. So that's why a lot of times you'll see kids who had a lot of trauma and maltreatment early in life. When they become teenagers, you see a lot of problems with them. And some of the problems that we see are like alcohol and drug abuse, depression, suicide.
Early onset of smoking,
Yep.
early sexual activity. So what happens in terms of the ACE pyramid is, so the foundation is that the adverse childhood experience themselves. The next stage is the disrupted neurodevelopment of the brain, which leads to then social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Mm-hmm. So the cognitive impairment, kind of think school. When kids go to school, they're expected to start learning some pretty abstract stuff, and if they're under so much stress because of what's happening in their family life, they just don't learn as well. Mm-hmm. And the social, emotional development is disrupted because if they have not learned to trust people in their family of origin, trust is the basis for all relationships. So they have impaired ability to trust others and form social relationships. So that's that third level up from the bottom. that then leads to the next level of adoption of health risk behaviors. So this typically happens around the teenage years, but from talking with folks in the jail, it can happen as early as 10 or 11. So you're in pain because of your experiences in the home environment. You want to feel better, so they start to self-medicate. Well, what makes you feel better? Smoking, drinking and drugging, overeating. Again, anything that makes you feel better puts the hormone dopamine into your brain, which makes you feel good. But the problem is if you start smoking and drinking and overeating, those are behaviors that will lead to physical health problems later in life. So we start moving up the ACE pyramid then.
It's beyond comprehension to imagine how much this is costing our society, isn't it?
Yes.
And I know you've worked in the prisons for a while now. And has this been a real revelation to you to see that research is really real when you're talking with these guys and gals?
Whenever I start my parent education groups, I always start with the ACE study, and generally the inmates are saying, that's me, that's my childhood.
Wow.
So, yes.
That's really, do you see certain age levels where certain things happen then, or is there some predictability to that, or is it kind of all over when they've gone through 1 or 2 or 3 of the ACE issues?
Well, so there's what's called like a dose response. So if you have 1 ACE, your chance of having these social and health problems is this great. But if you have 2 ACEs, it goes up. If you have 3, it goes up. And like Lowell said, that tipping point is 4. So if you have 4 or more, then you have a greater chance of having these social and emotional problems. So some of it is that, how many ACEs you have, the more likely you are to then have social and emotional problems.
Yeah. And part of it is which of the ACEs, what's the frequency, what's the duration,
the age at which it occurred, the gender of the child. Yeah. Yep, all those things play.
Is there an organization, statewide organization, that's working in this area?
Well, a few, but the ACE interface training that we've been part of is under auspices of Prevent Child Abuse Minnesota, which is now changing its name to Minnesota Communities Caring for Children. So that's the organization that we've been trained under, but there are a number of other organizations such as the Minnesota Fathers and Families Network and professional groups who are bringing forth the information about ACEs and its effect on families and communities.
So are there intervention plans when you find out that, let's say if you had parents that got involved with this and understood that what they've done is damaging to their children, are there any intervention training things available to help them try to undo some of the things that have happened? Are you working in that area at all?
Well, yes, some of the pieces are in place. There are people who are trying to work with dealing with the healing from ACE's experience with the adults who've already been through it. And we are working more right now on the prevention end. How do we keep these ACEs from happening, or at least diminish the effect of them?
I can imagine it's a huge field, and I didn't mean to throw a surprise at you there, but I just was curious to know if teachers or other people are being trained to recognize this, and then if you do recognize it, what can you do to sort of intervene and help these kids? But that's
the intervening. I'm glad you asked that question, because the answer to the problem of ACEs, it lies in resiliency, and how do we build resiliency? And there's research about best practices or characteristics about how do children get resilient to the effect of these ACEs.
Yeah. So we call them core protective systems. And so there are kind of 3 primary core protective systems. There's the individual capabilities of someone, and so that would include somebody believing that what they do matters, that the choices that they make impact, that they're important, and that they have value. The next one is attachment and belonging to caring adults, and it's not just caring, it's caring and competent adults. So the competent piece comes into where adults who either have the training, like you said, maybe parents who have gone through parenting classes, so they know how to, if you don't parent this way because it creates ACEs, how do you, what are some good parenting practices then? Or like Lowell working where he works, where you have the skills and strategies to be able to work with people who have high ACE scores. So that's the competent piece, is having those adults. And then the third one is the communities, culture, and spirituality. So those are, having that community around that individual that that is caring, that is...
It provides a positive interactions model. So in our area, for instance, the shop, which is a drop-in center for youth, is a example of a community institution that is helping to break the ACE cycle, because it's a place where youth can go and have positive interactions and feel like they belong. Kinship Partners would be another example of a community group that providing mentors to youth who just need a healthy adult to hang around with. And so the resiliency can be boiled down to one word, and that's relationships.
Yep.
How many positive relationships does any individual young person have with caring and competent adults? And the more they have, the more resilient they are.
I know Lowell came and talked to our Rotary last fall, and it struck a raw nerve with a lot of our members when you started identifying issues that could have happened in all of our lives and how it affects us. And when you look at that research, it's really very interesting. It really is. And you, Susan, you said have you done some work on the tribal areas in this too?
Through being an ACE interface trainer, there are trainers across the state, and so I am working with some trainers who are up in the Bemidji area, and so we did a training up in Bemidji. I have another one that I'll be doing at the Leech Lake Tribal College in about a month. So we're trying to get this out to the tribal communities as well, because it impacts. I mean, the study that Lowell talked about, the original ACE study, was 17,000 white middle class individuals, and they, was it like 68% of them had one or more ACEs. So ACEs are common and they tend to co-occur, and so it's not unique to one community or another, but it is definitely, we see the implications of ACEs very strongly in tribal communities.
Lowell, what's been your experience when you've worked with inmates and they start understanding that this is part of their life? Have they been able to grab onto that to see if they can make changes in their lives? Have you had success with that?
Well, yeah, the discussions in the sessions at the jail are very robust. They definitely get the idea and that the ACEs cycle needs to be interrupted. They do not want what's happened in their lives to happen to their children. So there's a buy-in there, and then what we try to do in the classes is talk about, try to both understand the ACEs experiences and its effect on the brain, and then work on how can this be changed. And what I try to use is a strength-based approach, because resiliency, the research on resiliency says that you're going to be way more effective by building on people's strengths. We need to be aware of our weaknesses. We certainly all have weaknesses and need to be working on them, but the focus should be on our strengths. So the balance is focus on strengths, aware of the weaknesses and be working on them, but do not get hung up on the weaknesses. Because one of the things that tends to happen with ACEs adults is they've had some pretty crappy lives, and people whose life course has gone that direction, they tend to blame themselves. They say, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me that my life has turned out that way? But the better question is, what happened to me? Right. If you can understand dysfunction in your life as something that happened to you, it takes it out of the right brain and puts it into the left brain, where you can analyze and understand and plan to make change. So that's one of the critical questions, is what happened to me and what do I need to do to change my life so my children's life can be better in the future.
And is there anything available to answer that question? I mean, do you have as part of the study, you have procedures that you suggest people follow if they're trying to answer that question? What do they do with their lives to get it straightened out? Or is that kind of the area that is beyond what you're doing right now?
I think there's a lot of individual exercises and things that can be done, and I think the challenge is, how do we put those together that work for any one individual? So a lot of it is about reflection. It's about support from other people, hanging out with a positive peer group instead of a negative peer group, and making that choice, especially in the area of addictions and sobriety. Hear that message a lot. I cannot go back to that group that supported my addiction. I need to find a peer support group in the community that will support me in my efforts to stay sober. So that's a piece of it. And for some people, individual therapy is necessary, but almost more important is how can the community at large support a person who is trying to change their behavior.
So that's where those relationships are so important. to have
Yeah,
that support.
building relationships.
Wow. If somebody wants to find out about what you do, how's the best way to contact you folks?
Via email or phone.
And what would that be? How would they contact you?
I'm going to give my phone number as 218-828-6233.
And it's Lowell Johnson, and it's in Brainerd.
It's in Brainerd.
Yeah, your Brainerd address, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll be changing my email address soon, so that's why I'm not giving it out. But
okay.
I'll be available via phone, and my new email address will be on file here.
If they were to call you, they should ask you about ACEs.
Yes.
That's the easiest way, ACES.
Correct.
And that way that you'll know what they're talking about. And you do go out and you do workshops. And when you do the workshops, basically in a nutshell, what are you doing to expose people to this?
So there are kind of three sections to the training then when we go out, and the first one is the neurobiology, the impacts of ACEs on the brain. The second is the ACEs and the ACE study itself and what the study found. And then the third piece is on resilience. So we like to try to do something interactive with the resilience piece and really have individuals talking and reflecting with one another on how they can either in their groups or their families or within the community build those resiliency strategies.
Is there a fee for this?
Negotiable.
Negotiable, okay.
From free to something else.
Right.
Depending
Yeah.
on the organization.
Yeah. And Susan is, you're available still. You're not changing your email address, are you?
No.
And now, Susan, you said are you working on your doctorate in this study?
Well, I'm working on my PhD at the University of Minnesota in the social administrative pharmacy program. And so kind of how I got into this was looking at social emotional learning and some of these alternative resiliency strategies versus medication for ADHD, depression, anxiety.
Well, really good stuff. I think you're doing really marvelous work, and I commend you for taking the interest in our children. That's so important. Thank you very much for being on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.